In a quiet, sacred moment by the flowing waters of the Jordan River, an act took place that would forever mark the turning point in human history. A man stepped forward, not adorned in fine garments, not accompanied by trumpets or heralds, but in the simplicity of human form. Dust on his feet, weariness in his bones, and yet divinity glowing beneath his humility. As he approached the prophet who had long been crying out in the wilderness, calling people to repentance, the air shifted, the sky seemed to pause. The river, which had seen generations come and go, now bore witness to something far greater. The prophet hesitated at first. How could he baptize the one whose sandals he felt unworthy to untie? But the man insisted, not out of pride, but because it was right, because it fulfilled righteousness, because it aligned with a divine rhythm far beyond human understanding. As he was submerged in the water, something unseen yet powerful was set into motion, and when he emerged, drenched in the river's current, the skies split open. It was not a lightning storm or an earthquake, but a moment of pure spiritual unveiling. A dove descended, soft and silent, resting gently upon him, a symbol not just of peace, but of divine presence, hovering as it once did over the deep at the dawn of creation. Then a voice thundered, not loud in volume, but infinite in power. It came not from the earth, but from the heavens, not from any man, but from God himself. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. This was no metaphor, no parable, no riddle. It was an eternal truth spoken into time. That moment wasn't just for those standing at the riverbank, it was for every generation to come. It was for every seeker, every sinner, every outcast, every doubter, and every broken soul. That voice did not merely affirm identity, it announced mission. It declared that the long-awaited Messiah had stepped into the world stage, not to conquer with swords, but to heal with hands, to restore with words, to redeem with blood. The baptism wasn't a ceremony for cleansing, it was a coronation in humility. While kings are crowned with gold and celebrated by nations, he was affirmed in water and revealed to those who had eyes to see and hearts to receive. This beginning shattered expectations. The Jews had long awaited a savior, someone to overthrow oppressors, restore the kingdom, and bring justice to the earth. But instead of political force, they received a carpenter's son, baptized by a wild prophet. Instead of war cries, they heard a heavenly voice of approval. Instead of spectacle, they witnessed surrender. That day the heavens were not just opened, they were torn apart, as if God was saying that the separation between divine and human had come to an end. The voice didn't come after a miracle or a sermon or a great act of leadership. It came simply because of who he was. The Father's love and approval were not earned, they were declared. This baptism also served as a profound message to the world about identity and affirmation. Before any public teaching, before any healing, before calling his first disciple, Jesus was named and known. He was loved before he performed. He was approved before he acted. In that moment, humanity was shown what it means to live from a place of identity rather than constantly striving to earn it. And just as he was submerged in water, symbolizing death and rebirth, so too would his life mirror that arc, dying for the world and rising again, ushering in new life for all. The crowd watching may not have fully understood what they had seen, but the earth itself felt the tremble. The kingdom had begun, not in palaces, but in water, not with weapons, but with a word. And that word still echoes today, calling each heart to remember, identity is not found in what we do, but in who we are in the eyes of the one who made us. In the silence of the desert, after the river had welcomed him and the heavens had declared his identity, he walked into a place few willingly go. It wasn't a palace, a temple, or a gathering of the learned. It was the wilderness, a place untouched by comfort, marked by dust and heat, void of noise but filled with spiritual battle. There were no crowds here, no disciples, no miracles, only wild beasts, sand, solitude, and temptation. For 40 days and 40 nights he walked this path alone, fasting, praying, facing the full weight of the enemy's pressure. Hunger gripped his body, but purpose sustained his soul. This was not just a test of endurance. It was a battleground of identity, authority, and surrender. The adversary did not attack with weapons, but with whispers. Crafty, calculated, ancient. He knew who this man was, and he knew what his mission would mean for the world. So he waited until the body was weak, thinking perhaps the spirit would be too. The first temptation came like a suggestion, wrapped in logic. If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. It was subtle. It questioned not only his hunger, but his identity. It implied that divine power should serve personal need. But he answered not with argument, but with truth. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. It was a refusal not just to feed the body, but to misuse power. He chose dependency on the Father over self-reliance. Even in his hunger, he remained whole. Then came the second temptation, daring him to throw himself from the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God, the tempter said again, prove it. Let the angels catch you. It was a call to spectacle, to ego, to demand proof from heaven to validate himself before others. But again, he stood firm. You shall not test the Lord your God. His response wasn't born from fear, but from reverence. He didn't need signs to confirm who he was. He was grounded in the voice he had already heard at the Jordan. You are my beloved Son. He refused to turn his relationship with God into a performance for validation. This silence, this restraint, was strength. The final temptation came with a vision of all the kingdoms of the world, power, glory, control, all offered in a single moment for one condition: bow down and worship me. This was the heart of all temptation, the shortcut to influence without obedience, the crown without the cross. He was shown the very thing he came to redeem, but offered it without the suffering, without the sacrifice, without the Father's plan. It was a lie painted with beauty. But his answer thundered in the stillness. Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. With that, the enemy fled. Not because he couldn't tempt anymore, but because he couldn't deceive him. This 40-day trial was more than personal struggle. It was a declaration of authority over everything that had enslaved mankind. Where the first humans failed in a garden full of abundance, he stood victorious in a desert of lack. Where others gave in to pride, appetite, and ambition, he triumphed through obedience, humility, and unwavering faith. This was not weakness. It was the fiercest strength the world had ever seen, a quiet, unshakable defiance against evil. In resisting these temptations, he didn't just show the path of righteousness, he paved it. Every moment in that wilderness was a step deeper into his mission, a refining fire before the public flame. He emerged not only with a body worn thin, but with a spirit sharpened and ready. From there he would begin to speak, to heal, to confront, and to invite. But it was in this hidden place, in the battle no one else saw, that the foundation was laid. What happened in the wilderness wasn't just about resisting the devil. It was about declaring who would have the final say in the story of humanity. And he made it clear. It would not be the voice of temptation, but the voice of the Father. When he stepped into the world to begin his ministry, he didn't go to the halls of kings or the temples of the high priests. He did not align himself with scholars or those holding influence. Instead, he walked along the shoreline where the smell of salt water hung in the air and nets were being cast by calloused hands. His eyes fell upon ordinary men, fishermen, working in the grit of everyday life. There were no resumes, no rituals, no qualifications. He simply spoke, "Follow me," and they did. They left everything, boats, nets, families, to walk into an unknown journey, guided only by trust in the voice that had called them. This was not by accident. The beginning of his ministry was a deliberate reversal of how the world chooses leaders. He didn't seek the most powerful, the most educated, or the most religious. He chose the unseen, the unimportant, the ones who probably never imagined themselves being part of anything greater than a daily catch. In doing this, he elevated the ordinary. He made it clear that the kingdom he was bringing wasn't built on status, but on surrender. By calling common men to uncommon purpose, he demonstrated that greatness in his kingdom comes not through position, but through obedience. These first followers didn't know theology or prophecy. They had no title or fame. They had flaws, tempers, doubts, and fears. But they said yes. That yes echoed louder than any sermon. He wasn't just calling them to walk beside him physically, he was inviting them to walk in his way, his character, his truth, his mission. This was discipleship in its rawest form. To learn not only from what he said, but from how he lived. He taught them not through classrooms, but through roads, storms, meals, miracles, and moments of silence. Each encounter, each act of compassion, each confrontation with injustice was a lesson in how heaven touched earth. As his ministry spread, so did his message. But again, it wasn't to the crowds that he entrusted the secrets of the kingdom, it was to these few who followed him closely. He let them witness his tears, his prayers, his exhaustion. He let them see him heal the broken, welcome the sinner, touch the untouchable. In doing so, he reshaped their understanding of what it meant to be chosen. They were not chosen to rule over others. They were chosen to serve them, not to be admired, but to carry the burdens of the forgotten. Through them he planted the seeds of a kingdom that would outlive empires. There was nothing glamorous about the beginning of this movement. There were no temples built, no banners flown, no armies gathered. Just men learning how to love the way he loved, to see the world the way he saw it. And as they watched him touch the leper, eat with tax collectors, and speak to women with dignity, their hearts began to change. Their old way of seeing the world, divided by status and sin, slowly gave way to something new, a kingdom of grace. The calling of these first disciples was also a calling to let go. They left behind more than their jobs. They left behind their ideas of what life was supposed to be. They surrendered their control, their certainty, their comfort. And in return, they gained purpose. Not the kind that made them rich or safe, but the kind that made them alive. Their lives became mirrors, reflecting the light of the one they followed. It wasn't about perfection, it was about proximity. Staying close to him, even when they didn't understand, even when they stumbled, even when the world pushed back. What he began with them was not just a movement, it was a relationship. One built on trust, forged in trials, and held together by love. He didn't give them a map, he gave them himself. And that was enough. Through their simple obedience, the world would come to see a different kind of power, a power not rooted in dominance, but in devotion. These first steps, with a few forgotten men along the shores of Galilee, would stretch across time, lighting the way for generations to come, all because he chose the ordinary to reveal the extraordinary. The world had always measured greatness by force, by wealth, by title, by how many others bowed in your presence. From empires to religious systems, power was often defined by dominance. But when he began to walk through towns and villages, healing the sick and teaching with authority, he quietly redefined what true power looked like. He did not arrive on horseback with soldiers. He did not carry scrolls filled with laws or sit atop a throne. He walked with dusty feet, surrounded by the poor, the curious, and the forgotten. And yet, wherever he went, things shifted. Hearts softened, demons fled, diseases vanished. People listened, not because he demanded it, but because truth carried weight when it came from his lips. He did not shout his authority, he demonstrated it. When the blind came to him, he didn't wave his hand with pomp, he touched their eyes with tenderness. When a leper approached, unclean and cast out by society, he didn't recoil. He placed his hands on infected skin and restored what no one else dared to touch. That was power, not in avoiding the unworthy, but in embracing them, not in punishing sin, but in transforming the sinner. His miracles weren't magic tricks. They were acts of divine love, revealing the heart of a God who sees, who hears, and who heals. He walked among people who had been taught their entire lives that they were too dirty, too broken, too far gone to matter. Yet he looked them in the eye and called them by name. Power became proximity, authority became intimacy. He stood by the woman at the well and saw her story before she spoke a word. He stood before the woman caught in adultery while stones were raised, and he lowered their hands not with commands, but with a question that pierced their conscience. Who among you is without sin? No army could have stopped that moment. No crown could have added more weight to his words, because true power does not crush, it convicts and redeems. He didn't gather people with threats or rewards, he drew them with truth. And the truth didn't just expose what was wrong, it revealed what was possible. In his presence, fishermen believed they could be world changers, tax collectors believed they could be righteous, women believed they could be seen, children believed they mattered. That was the power he carried, the ability to awaken identity in those who had been told they were nothing. He also used his power to confront the structures that had abused it. He walked into temples and overturned tables, not out of rage, but out of justice. Those who had turned worship into business felt the force of his conviction. He challenged religious leaders who added burdens to people's backs, but wouldn't lift a finger to help. He spoke plainly to them, calling out hypocrisy and pride, not to shame, but to expose what had gone so far from the heart of God. He wasn't afraid of power, he just knew what it was meant to be. Every teaching he gave flipped the world's logic upside down. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek shall inherit the earth. The greatest among you will be your servant. These weren't poetic ideas, they were revolutionary truths. In saying them, he was not just describing heaven's culture, he was inviting people to live it on earth. This was a new kind of kingdom, one where the last were first, where enemies were loved, where forgiveness was stronger than revenge. The people who followed him were expecting a warrior king. They longed for someone to overthrow the empire, to take back control. But he walked among them quietly, teaching them that the battle was not against Rome, but against fear, hatred, pride, and the lies that had ruled their hearts for too long. He offered a new way, not just to act, but to see, to feel, to live. In doing so, he proved that real power doesn't come from taking control, it comes from giving yourself away. Every time he chose compassion over condemnation, every time he silenced a storm or a critic with peace, every time he forgave when others would have punished, he dismantled the old ideas of what it meant to be strong. And in their place, he planted something radical. A vision of power that healed, lifted, and changed the world, not by might, but by mercy. When he walked through the towns, he didn't pass by the broken, he moved toward them. The hurting, the outcast, the sick, the shamed, they weren't obstacles to avoid, they were the very reason he had come. His miracles weren't performances designed to impress crowds, they were personal, intimate moments of restoration, revealing the heart of one who came not to be served, but to serve. Each miracle carried more than power. It carried compassion. When he saw the blind man sitting at the roadside, he didn't see an inconvenience. He saw a soul that had been living in darkness. He touched his eyes, and for the first time the man saw not just the world, but the one who healed him. The lepers, pushed outside the city walls, living with shame and fear, had learned to call out from a distance. They weren't allowed to be touched, weren't even allowed to be near others. But when they cried out to him, he didn't walk away or heal them from afar. He walked toward them, reached out his hand, and did the unthinkable. He touched them. Before the healing came, the dignity came. That single touch told them what the world had forgotten. You are not untouchable. You are not forgotten. You are not less. And then he made them whole. He met the paralyzed man lying on a mat, silent, still, helpless. And before he told him to rise, he said something greater. Your sins are forgiven. The crowd was stunned. What kind of man speaks with such authority? What kind of man looks past the obvious and goes deeper to the pain that can't be seen? But that was the nature of his miracles. They weren't surface-level acts. They were invitations to a life fully restored, body and soul. Healing wasn't just about movement, it was about mercy. He met a woman bleeding for 12 years who had spent everything she had, chasing cure after cure, and found only disappointment. She came not to be noticed, but to reach, to touch even the edge of his cloak. She believed that if she could just make contact, something would change. And as her fingers brushed his garment, healing flooded her body. He stopped. He turned. He searched the crowd, not to scold her, but to speak to her. Daughter, your faith has made you well. In a culture that had labeled her unclean, he called her daughter. His miracle wasn't just physical healing. It was the return of identity and belonging. A father came, his heart crushed under the weight of a dying daughter. A woman wept, her only son now lifeless in a coffin. Again and again, death tried to speak the final word, but he walked into those moments with a stillness that silenced panic. He took the girl's hand and whispered, "Little girl, arise." He touched the coffin and returned the son to his mother. He wasn't afraid of death. He walked straight into it and unraveled its grip, replacing sorrow with joy, finality with hope. Even the storms obeyed him. When the winds roared and the waves threatened to sink the boat, he stood and spoke 3 words: "Peace, be still." And nature listened. His miracles weren't limited to flesh and bone. He ruled over creation itself, not through force, but through perfect authority. But again, he didn't calm the storm to show off power, he did it to protect those with him. Every miracle was love in action. But it was not only physical suffering he came to heal. He walked into the homes of tax collectors and sinners, the very people rejected by the religious elite. He sat with them, ate with them, listened to them, and forgave them. When others saw filth, he saw potential. When others saw shame, he saw stories waiting to be rewritten. He didn't use miracles to gain popularity, he used them to pull people closer to the heart of God. Each healing, each deliverance, each moment of restored sight or resurrected life pointed to something deeper than power. It pointed to the presence of divine love breaking into human pain. Through every miracle, he wasn't just fixing what was broken, he was showing the world that no one is beyond restoration. No pain is too great, no past too messy, no sickness too deep. His miracles were living proof that love does not stand far off. It enters into suffering, into dirt, into silence, and transforms it from within. When he spoke, the air seemed to hold its breath. His words didn't sound like the scribes or the scholars. There was no echo of tradition, no long-winded explanations meant to impress. He spoke with authority, not because of a title, but because every sentence carried the weight of heaven. Crowds gathered, drawn by something they couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just what he said. His voice pierced through the surface and struck the core of the human heart. He spoke in ways the common person could understand, but the depth of his meaning could shake the foundations of nations. His teachings were not safe. They were not designed to make people feel comfortable or confirm what they already believed. He began to speak of a kingdom that turned the world upside down. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he said. "Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek." These were not the blessings people expected. They had been told all their lives that blessing looked like wealth, power, strength, and victory. But here was a man saying that mourning, humility, and spiritual poverty were doorways to heaven. This wasn't just different, it was revolutionary. He wasn't pointing people toward religious superiority, he was revealing that God was closer to the broken than they had ever dared to hope. He taught forgiveness not as an option, but as a command. He told people to love their enemies, to pray for those who hurt them, to give without expecting anything in return. These were not suggestions for the righteous, they were invitations into the very heart of God. He wasn't creating a code of conduct, he was describing a way of life, one rooted in mercy, sacrifice, and radical love. Every parable he told revealed a mystery, not just of theology, but of grace. The kingdom of heaven was like a mustard seed, like hidden treasure, like a father running to embrace a prodigal son. Through stories, he dismantled centuries of assumption and rebuilt hope in the soil of imagination. But his words didn't only comfort, they cut. He spoke to the crowds with gentleness, but he confronted the powerful with clarity. He warned against hypocrisy, against empty religion that performed in public but lacked love in private. He rebuked those who piled laws upon people's backs but refused to lift a finger to help them. "You clean the outside of the cup," he said, "but inside you are full of greed and self-indulgence." His words exposed what no ritual could cover. He called for hearts, not appearances. For truth, not tradition. His teaching on the law was not about erasing it, but fulfilling it. He said, "You have heard it said, but I say to you," and in those phrases, he redefined righteousness. Adultery was no longer limited to action, it was in the gaze. Murder was no longer just the act, it was in the anger. He drew the line deeper, not to condemn, but to call people higher. Not a list of rules, but a transformation of spirit. He spoke not to control people, but to set them free from pride, from hatred, from the quiet chains that no one else could see. Children gathered around him, not because they understood doctrine, but because they felt safe. Women listened, not because they were granted permission by men, but because he dignified them when no one else did. The poor sat in front, the lame leaned in, the hungry listened with more than ears. His teaching fed souls starving for truth that didn't come with a price tag or a wall. He offered living water to the thirsty, bread of life to the starving, and words that carried eternity in their sound. And yet there was mystery in his words. He often said, "He who has ears, let him hear." Not everyone understood. Many turned away. His teachings weren't easy, but they were true. They demanded surrender. They called for transformation. They didn't fit into systems of power or religious pride. They called for a new way, a narrow road, a cross to carry, a love that cost something. And for those who stayed, who truly listened, his words became not just guidance, but the very foundation of life itself. Words that didn't just teach, but awakened. Words that still, to this day, refuse to be silenced. He did not come to build an empire or to gather followers for the sake of fame. He came to turn hearts back to where they belonged. His mission was not to add layers of religion, but to remove the weight of guilt, shame, and performance. He spoke not of systems, but of relationship. And with every word, every act, every silence, he drew humanity back to the original intention: union with the heart of God. This was not about ritual or law-keeping, not about climbing a ladder of spiritual success. It was about knowing, truly knowing, the one who created and loved them. The ones he called had spent their lives separated from that closeness, taught that they were too sinful, too dirty, too distant. But he came to change that story. He walked among people whose hearts were tired of trying to measure up, tired of carrying burdens they couldn't name. The religious system had made God feel far away, like a judge with a long list of rules and a distant throne. But he revealed something different. He revealed a father who runs to prodigals, who leaves the 99 to chase one lost soul, who forgives debts too great to repay. He didn't just teach about God's love, he embodied it. Every moment was a message that heaven was not beyond reach. It had come near. It had taken on flesh. It was walking with them, listening to them, healing them, and calling them home. His presence disrupted every expectation. The righteous were offended because he dined with sinners. The elite were confused because he spoke gently to the forgotten. The outcast were stunned because he welcomed them with no conditions. He saw what others couldn't: a soul beneath the shame, a story beneath the scars. He called tax collectors by name and changed their purpose. He allowed women to weep at his feet and rise in freedom. He crossed into enemy territories not to wage war, but to extend grace. His ministry was not a campaign, it was a rescue. There was no checklist to enter his presence, no ritual bath, no robes, no perfect words, only faith. Sometimes desperate, trembling, fragile faith, but it was enough. Because he didn't come to applaud the strong, he came to lift the weak. He came to shatter the lie that worth was earned. He looked into eyes that had only known rejection and said, "You are loved, you are seen, you are mine." His gospel was not about control, it was about connection. And it tore down every wall that had kept people away from God. He spoke of a kingdom not built on borders or laws, but on hearts surrendered in trust. A kingdom that was not coming someday, it was already breaking through. A mustard seed growing in the soil of faith, a hidden treasure buried in fields of ordinary life, a pearl of great price, worth surrendering everything for. He did not come to establish religion, he came to restore relationship. And every healing, every parable, every confrontation with the proud was an invitation back to that relationship. To walk again in the cool of the day with the Creator. To no longer hide in shame, but to stand in the light of grace. Those who followed him began to feel it. The world hadn't changed, but something in them had. Fishermen spoke with courage, former sinners stood with purpose. Women sang songs they never thought they had the right to sing. Children laughed without fear. The poor smiled with hope. He was undoing what the world had always said about them. He was revealing their original design, not defined by failure, but by love. And it wasn't temporary, it was eternal. He didn't give them rules to memorize. He gave them himself. He invited them to know the Father the way he did, not with formality, but with freedom. If you've seen me, he said, you've seen the Father. That statement tore through centuries of distance. It meant God was no longer a distant idea. He was a voice they could hear, a touch they could feel, a love they could trust. This was not about religion anymore. It was about a person. And through him, what was once lost could finally be found again. Every step he took was woven with intention. Nothing about his journey was random. From the places he chose to walk to the people he chose to speak to, every movement was purposeful. He didn't drift through life reacting to circumstances. He moved forward with eyes fixed on a mission that only he fully understood. There was a fire behind his gentleness, a direction within his silence, and a weight behind every word he spoke. His path was not about popularity or comfort. It was about impact, eternal impact. Each day was a thread in a divine plan, and each moment pushed that plan forward with relentless love. He didn't avoid the difficult places. He walked straight into them. He knew what rejection felt like, and yet returned to those who had turned him away. He understood the danger of confronting religious leaders, yet he stepped into the temple courts with clarity and boldness. He was aware that healing on the Sabbath would cause scandal, but he healed anyway. He wasn't trying to be safe. He was trying to set people free, and freedom, true freedom, often demands courage that looks like defiance to the world. He carried that courage like a quiet flame, never flashy, never loud, but unstoppable. There were no wasted encounters. When he stopped to speak with a Samaritan woman at a well, it wasn't a detour, it was destiny. When he called Zacchaeus down from a tree, it wasn't coincidence, it was calling. When he walked into the house of a grieving father, when he paused to touch the hem of a desperate woman, when he answered the cry of a blind beggar, every one of those moments was soaked in divine timing. He was not measuring his success by numbers or applause. He measured it by lives transformed, chains broken, and hearts awakened. Even in moments of exhaustion, he continued. He went up mountains to pray, not to escape people, but to remain aligned with the Father. He knew where his strength came from. His mission was not powered by momentum or ambition. It was fueled by obedience. He was not chasing crowds. He was chasing the will of the one who sent him. And in doing so, he revealed a rhythm the world didn't understand. A balance between divine action and sacred stillness. He showed that listening to God was just as important as speaking to people. He never rushed, but he never hesitated. When a storm threatened his disciples, he didn't panic. He rested until it was time to calm the waves. When the crowds tried to make him king, he slipped away, because his crown would come through a cross, not a throne. His steps were steady, not driven by impulse, but guided by love. He walked through villages with dust on his feet and purpose in his soul, knowing that each healing, each word, each act of grace was leading toward a final act that would change everything. The closer he drew to the end, the more deliberate his actions became. He began to prepare his disciples not with easy promises, but with honest truth. He told them about suffering, about betrayal, about death, and they didn't understand, but he walked toward it anyway. He entered Jerusalem on a donkey, fulfilling prophecy, knowing the cheers of Hosanna would soon turn into shouts of "Crucify him!" Still, he kept moving forward. Love carried him. Not the soft, easy kind of love, but the kind that bleeds, that forgives, that endures betrayal and still gives more. He washed feet that would soon run away. He broke bread with one who would betray him. He prayed for strength in a garden where his soul was overwhelmed with sorrow. And still, he did not turn back. His every step was leading to a hill outside the city, a cross standing between earth and heaven. It was not an accident, it was the mission. From the beginning, every word he had spoken, every miracle he had performed, every heart he had touched, all of it was leading to that place. And yet, even in that final stretch, he noticed the ones around him. He healed a soldier's ear in the midst of his arrest. He looked at Peter with compassion after his denial. He spoke to a criminal hanging beside him, offering paradise. He entrusted his mother to a friend. Even as nails pierced his hands, his heart was still reaching for others. Every drop of blood, every breath, every step, even to the very end, was saturated with purpose. It was not a life lived in motion. It was a life lived on mission.